The frost came early to Fort Worth, Texas in the autumn of 1882, creeping across the grasslands like an unwelcome visitor. And when Rebecca Rose counted the coins in her father's old tobacco tin for the third time that morning, she knew there would not be enough to see them through winter. Her hands trembled as she placed the tin back on the kitchen shelf of the small cabin she shared with her mother, Margaret, who sat wrapped in quilts by the fireplace, despite the fact that the sun had barely risen. The cough that had started in spring had turned into something more sinister by summer, and now, as the cold weather approached, the doctor's visits had become frequent and expensive. Rebecca pressed her palms against the rough wooden counter and closed her eyes, willing herself not to cry. She was 22 years old, and crying would not put food on the table or buy the medicine her mother desperately needed. "Rebecca," her mother's voice was thin and weak from across the room, "you should eat something, darling." Rebecca turned and forced a smile. "I will, Mama. I am just thinking about what needs doing today." What needed doing was the one thing Rebecca had been avoiding for weeks. She stepped outside into the biting morning air and walked toward the small paddock behind the cabin where Willow stood, her gray coat silvered with morning dew. The mare lifted her head and nickered softly, trotting over to the fence where Rebecca stood. Rebecca reached out and stroked the velvety nose, feeling her throat tighten with emotion. She had raised Willow from a foal 5 years ago when her father was still alive. The birth had been difficult, and Rebecca had spent 3 days and nights in the barn, coaxing the tiny creature to stand, to nurse, to live. Her father had told her that Willow would be her horse, her responsibility, her companion. They had been inseparable ever since. Rebecca had trained her herself, spending countless hours teaching the mare to respond to the gentlest touch, the softest command. Willow was more than a horse. She was family, but family needed to eat, and medicine cost money, and the choice had been made for her by circumstance and desperation. Rebecca buried her face against Willow's neck and breathed in the familiar scent of horse and hay and autumn grass. "I am so sorry," she whispered. "I am so sorry." The decision to take Willow into town that morning felt like walking toward her own execution. Rebecca braided the mare's mane with careful fingers, wanting her to look her absolute best for potential buyers. She brushed the gray coat until it gleamed, picked out each hoof with meticulous care, and finally led Willow out onto the road that would take them into Fort Worth. The 3-mile journey passed both too quickly and too slowly. Every step of Willow's hooves against the hard, packed earth felt like a countdown to an ending Rebecca was not ready to face. The mare walked beside her with the easy trust of years of companionship, occasionally bumping her nose against Rebecca's shoulder as if to say she was there. She understood. Everything would be all right. Fort Worth was already bustling when they arrived. The main street was crowded with wagons and horses, men conducting business outside the mercantile, women with shopping baskets hurrying between stores. Rebecca led Willow to the livestock market on the east side of town, a dusty corral where horses and cattle were bought and sold every day. Her stomach twisted as she approached the auctioneer, a grizzled man named Joe who had known her father. "Need to sell her?" Joe asked, looking at Willow with an appraising eye. Rebecca nodded, not trusting her voice. "She is a fine-looking mare," Joe said. "Well trained, I can see. Should fetch a good price." Rebecca swallowed hard. "How soon can you sell her? I can put her up this morning if you want. Auction starts in an hour." Joe pulled out a ledger and a pencil. "What is her name, Willow?" Rebecca's voice cracked on the word. Joe wrote it down without seeming to notice her distress. "Age, 5 years old. I raised her from birth. She is gentle, good with cattle, excellent on trails, never balked or bucked in her life." Joe nodded and continued writing. You will get 70% of the sale price after commission. Fair enough. It was not fair at all, but Rebecca had no room to negotiate. She needed the money today, and she needed enough of it to matter. She nodded again and handed over Willow's lead rope, feeling as though she were handing over a piece of her own heart. The hour before the auction was agony. Rebecca stood near the corral fence, watching as other horses were led in and inspected by potential buyers. Men walked around the animals, checking teeth, running hands over legs and backs, looking for any sign of weakness or fault. When they brought Willow out, Rebecca had to look away. She could not watch strangers touch her horse, could not bear to see Willow's confused expression as she searched the crowd for Rebecca's familiar face. The auction began with smaller lots, ponies and old workhorses that sold for modest prices. Rebecca counted the money in her mind, calculating how much she needed at minimum, praying that Willow would bring enough. When the auctioneer finally brought Willow into the ring, Rebecca forced herself to watch. "Fine gray mare, 5 years old, well-trained and gentle," Joe called out to the assembled buyers. "Good for riding or light ranch work. What am I bid?" The bidding started at $30. Rebecca's heart sank. That would not be enough, not nearly enough. But then a voice called out, $40. Another voice countered, $45. The first voice came back stronger, $55. Rebecca strained to see who was bidding but could not make out faces in the crowd of men near the auction ring. The price climbed slowly, agonizingly. $60, $65, $70, $70, Joe called. "Do I hear 75? A long pause, and then the voice that had started the bidding came back. $80. Silence fell over the crowd. $80 was a good price for a 5-year-old mare, more than fair. Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes. It was enough. After the commission, she would have $56, enough for 2 months of medicine and food, maybe 3 if they were careful. $80 once, Joe called. $80 twice, sold to the gentleman in the black hat. Rebecca's vision blurred with tears as the auctioneer handed Willow's lead rope to the buyer. She turned away quickly, not wanting to see the mare being led away by a stranger. Joe found her a few minutes later and pressed a small leather pouch into her hand. $56, he said quietly. "I am sorry, Rebecca. I know this was not easy." She could only nod and clutch the pouch to her chest. The weight of it felt both like salvation and condemnation. She had the money her mother needed, but the cost had been almost more than she could bear. Rebecca was halfway down the street, heading back toward home, when she heard hoofbeats behind her. She turned and saw a man riding Willow, leading her in Rebecca's direction. He was tall, dressed in worn denim and a black hat pulled low over his eyes. As he drew closer, Rebecca could see he was young, maybe 25 or 26, with dark hair and a weather-beaten face that spoke of years spent outdoors. He pulled Willow to a stop directly in front of Rebecca, and she saw his eyes for the first time. They were a striking shade of blue-gray, the color of storm clouds over the prairie, and they were looking at her with an expression she could not quite read. "You are the one who raised this mare." His voice was deep and quiet. Rebecca clutched the leather pouch tighter. "Yes. I raised her from a foal." The man dismounted in one fluid motion and stood holding Willow's reins. He was tall, taller than Rebecca had realized, with broad shoulders and the lean, muscular build of someone who made his living through hard physical work. He studied Rebecca's face for a long moment, and she realized with horror that there were tears streaming down her cheeks. She had not even felt herself start crying. "I am sorry," she said quickly, wiping at her face with her free hand. "I should not have looked back. She is yours now." "You paid for her fairly." The man said nothing. He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out the same leather pouch Joe had given him, the one containing his $80. Then he took the pouch from Rebecca's hand, the one with her $56, and placed the larger pouch in her palm instead. Rebecca stared at the money, confused. "I do not understand." "Take it," the man said, "and take your horse back." Rebecca's heart stopped. "What?" "I saw you during the auction," the man said. "I saw the way you could not watch when they brought her out. I saw you crying when I bought her." He held out Willow's reins toward Rebecca. "No one should have to sell something they love that much. Take her back." Rebecca could not move, could not speak, could not process what was happening. This stranger had just spent $80 on a horse, only to give both the horse and the money back to her. It made no sense. "I cannot," she finally managed. "I cannot take your money. You paid for her." "Then consider it a gift." The man pressed the reins into her hand. "Or a loan, if that makes you feel better. You can pay me back when you are able." Willow pushed her nose against Rebecca's shoulder, and the familiar gesture broke something open inside her. She reached up to stroke the mare's face, and the tears came harder, great racking sobs that she could not control. She had not cried like this since her father died, had held everything inside for so long, because there was no time for tears when there was work to be done, and a sick mother to care for. The man stood awkwardly for a moment, then gently took Rebecca's elbow and guided her to a bench outside the general store. He took Willow's reins and tied her to the hitching post, then sat down beside Rebecca and waited while she cried. When she finally got control of herself, she felt exhausted and embarrassed. "I am sorry," she said for what felt like the 100th time that day. "I do not normally fall apart like this in front of strangers." "You just sold your horse to buy medicine for someone you love," the man said. It was not a question, but a statement of fact. "Am I right?" Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "How did you know?" "I saw you counting the money like you were calculating something specific, and you have the look of someone who has been up nights caring for the sick." "My mother was ill for a long time before she passed. I recognized the signs." He tipped his hat back slightly, and Rebecca could see his face more clearly now. He had kind eyes, she realized, despite the hardness of his features. "What is your name?" Rebecca rose. "Nathan Turner." He offered his hand, and she shook it, feeling the calluses that spoke of years of ranch work. "I run a small cattle operation about 10 miles north of town. Been looking for a good horse to add to my string, but I find I do not need one as badly as you need to keep yours." Rebecca looked down at the leather pouch in her lap. $80. It was more than she had dared hope for at the auction, more than enough to see them through winter and into spring. But taking charity from a complete stranger went against everything her father had taught her about self-reliance and dignity. "I cannot accept this," she said, trying to hand the money back. "It is too much. You do not even know me." "I know you love your horse enough to cry over selling her," Nathan said. "I know you needed the money badly enough to do it anyway. That tells me everything I need to know about your character." He stood up and untied Willow from the hitching post, handing the reins back to Rebecca. "Like I said, consider it a loan. When your circumstances improve, you can pay me back. Until then, I am just helping out a neighbor." "I live 3 miles south of town," Rebecca said. "That makes us 13 miles apart. We are hardly neighbors." A small smile tugged at the corner of Nathan's mouth. Close enough for Texas. Rebecca found herself smiling back despite everything. She stood up, still holding Willow's reins, and faced Nathan directly. "I will pay you back, every penny, I promise you that. I believe you." Nathan tipped his hat to her. "Take care of your mother, Miss Rose, and take care of that mare. She is something special." He turned to walk away, and Rebecca was seized by a sudden panic at the thought of him leaving. "Wait," she called out. "How will I find you when I have the money to repay you?" Nathan paused and looked back over his shoulder. My ranch is north of town on the old cattle trail, right where the creek forks. Anyone in Fort Worth can give you directions. Turner Ranch, been in my family since before the war." Then he was gone, disappearing into the crowd on the street, leaving Rebecca standing with Willow and a pouch of money that felt like it weighed 100 pounds. The ride home felt surreal. Rebecca kept expecting to wake up and find that the whole thing had been a dream, that she would still have to sell Willow, that the kind stranger had never existed at all. But Willow was real beneath her hand, and the money was real in her pocket, and somehow, impossibly, everything was going to be all right. When she got home, her mother was asleep by the fire. Rebecca quietly put the money in the tobacco tin, keeping out enough for a trip to the doctor and the apothecary. Then she led Willow back to the paddock, gave her extra feed, and stood for a long time with her arms around the mare's neck, breathing in the scent of home and safety and second chances. That night, after the doctor had come and gone with new medicine for her mother, Rebecca told Margaret what had happened. Her mother listened with wide eyes, her thin hands clutching the quilt around her shoulders. What kind of man does something like that? Margaret asked when Rebecca had finished the story. "I do not know, Mama, but I intend to pay him back every cent." Margaret studied her daughter's face in the firelight. "You should thank him properly. Tomorrow you should ride out to his ranch and bring him something. Maybe some of that apple pie you make so well. It is the least we can do." Rebecca thought about it and nodded. Her mother was right. Nathan Turner had done something extraordinary, and he deserved more than a stammered thank you on a street corner. She would ride out to Turner Ranch the next day and thank him properly. She spent the next morning baking an apple pie with the last of their stored apples from the previous autumn. Her mother watched from her chair, offering suggestions and encouragement, looking more animated than she had in weeks. The medicine was already helping, Rebecca could tell, and the relief of knowing they had enough money to continue treatment had lifted a weight from both of them. Rebecca wrapped the pie carefully in a clean cloth and packed it in a saddlebag. She brushed Willow until the mare's coat gleamed, more out of nervous energy than necessity, and set out toward Turner Ranch. The directions were easy enough to follow. She took the old cattle trail north out of Fort Worth, riding through open prairie that was turning gold and brown with the onset of autumn. The day was clear and cold, the kind of weather that made her glad for her wool coat and gloves. After about 45 minutes of riding, she came to the fork in the creek Nathan had mentioned. The ranch house sat on a gentle rise overlooking the creek. It was a solid structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch across the front and smoke rising from the chimney. There was a large barn, several corrals and pasture that stretched as far as Rebecca could see. Cattle grazed in the distance, small dark shapes against the golden grass. As Rebecca rode up to the house, Nathan emerged from the barn. He was in his shirt sleeves despite the cold, and Rebecca could see he had been working, his hands dirty and his dark hair disheveled. He stopped short when he saw her, surprise crossing his features. "Miss Rose," he said, walking toward her. "I did not expect to see you so soon." Rebecca dismounted, suddenly feeling foolish for coming. "I wanted to thank you properly, and my mother insisted I bring you this." She pulled the pie from the saddlebag and held it out to him. Nathan took the pie and unwrapped it partially, a genuine smile spreading across his face. "Apple pie. That is my favorite. I hope it is good. I have not made one in a while." Rebecca felt her cheeks flush. "I also wanted you to know that the money you gave us, it is making a real difference already. My mother saw the doctor yesterday, and she has medicine now that she could not have afforded otherwise. You may have saved her life." Nathan's expression grew serious. "I am glad I could help, truly." He gestured toward the house. Would you like to come in? I can make coffee and we could share some of this pie. Rebecca hesitated. It would not be entirely proper for her to go into a bachelor's home unchaperoned, but something about Nathan made her feel safe. Besides, she found she did not want to leave yet. The ride back to her small cabin and her sick mother suddenly seemed lonely. I would like that, she said. The inside of Nathan's house was neat and spare, the home of a man who lived alone and kept things simple. There was a large fireplace with a comfortable-looking chair beside it, a wooden table with 4 chairs in the kitchen area, and shelves lined with books. Rebecca was surprised by the books. There must have been 50 or 60 of them, more than she had ever seen in a private home. You read? She asked, unable to hide her surprise. Nathan looked almost embarrassed. My mother was a schoolteacher before she married my father. She taught me to love books. I order them from back east whenever I can afford to. He said about making coffee while Rebecca looked at the titles on the shelves. There were novels by Dickens and Hawthorne, volumes of poetry, books about animal husbandry and agriculture, even a worn copy of Shakespeare's collected works. You can borrow any of them if you like, Nathan offered. I do not have anyone to talk to about books out here. It would be nice to share them with someone. Rebecca pulled down a copy of Jane Eyre, a book she had always wanted to read but had never had access to. Are you certain? Absolutely. Nathan poured 2 cups of coffee and cut generous slices of pie. Consider it interest on the loan you are so determined to pay back. They sat at the table, and Rebecca found herself relaxing in Nathan's presence. He asked about her mother's illness, and Rebecca explained about the cough that had started after a particularly wet spring, how it had gradually worsened until Margaret could barely get out of bed most days. The doctor says it is consumption, Rebecca said quietly. He thinks if we can keep her comfortable through the winter and build up her strength, she might recover, but there are no guarantees. I am sorry, Nathan said. Watching someone you love suffer is one of the hardest things in the world. Your mother, Rebecca said carefully. You said she passed, Nathan nodded. 3 years ago, heart trouble. She went peacefully in her sleep one night. My father died in the war when I was 12, so it was just the 2 of us for a long time. This ranch was hers, inherited from her father. I have been running it on my own since she died. That must be lonely, Rebecca said without thinking, then immediately regretted it. I am sorry, I should not have said that. It is true, though, Nathan said. He looked out the window at the empty prairie stretching beyond. It is lonely. I keep busy with the cattle and the horses, but some days I can go a week without speaking to another soul besides my animals. They talked for over an hour, the conversation flowing easily from one topic to another. Nathan told her about the challenges of running a ranch alone, about the cattle drives he had led, about his plans to expand the herd in the spring. Rebecca told him about growing up in Fort Worth, about her father who had been a blacksmith, about the small cabin where she and her mother struggled to make ends meet doing mending and laundry for families in town. When Rebecca finally rose to leave, the sun was already past its zenith, and she realized she had stayed far longer than she had intended. But she did not regret it. For the first time in months, she had felt like herself again, not just a caretaker or a worrier, but a person with thoughts and opinions and a life beyond survival. Nathan walked her out to where Willow was tied. Thank you for the pie, he said, and for the company. I enjoyed talking with you. I enjoyed it too, Rebecca admitted. Thank you for the book. She patted the copy of Jane Eyre that was now wrapped in cloth in her saddlebag. Come back when you finish it, Nathan said. You can tell me what you thought and borrow another one. Rebecca mounted Willow and looked down at Nathan. In the afternoon light, his eyes looked more gray than blue, and there was an expression on his face that made her heart beat a little faster. "I will," she promised, "and I will start working on paying back the money. It might take some time, but I always keep my promises." "I am not worried about the money, Rebecca." It was the first time he had used her given name without the formal Miss Rose, and the sound of it in his voice sent warmth through her despite the cold. "Just take care of yourself and your mother. That is all the payment I need to see." Rebecca rode home with her thoughts in turmoil. She barely knew Nathan Turner, and yet she found herself already looking forward to the next time she would see him. It was impractical and probably foolish to develop feelings for a man under these circumstances. She had her mother to care for, debts to pay, and no time for romance. But as Willow carried her back toward Fort Worth, Rebecca could not stop thinking about storm cloud eyes and the way Nathan had looked at her when they said goodbye. The winter that had seemed so threatening just days ago now felt different. Rebecca still had challenges ahead, still had to find ways to earn money and care for her mother, but the crushing desperation had lifted. With the medicine Nathan's gift had provided, Margaret began to improve slowly. The terrible coughing fits became less frequent, and she was able to sit up for longer periods, even help with small tasks around the cabin. Rebecca read Jane Eyre by firelight in the evenings, and when she finished it, 2 weeks later, she rode back to Turner Ranch to return it and borrow another. Nathan greeted her like an old friend, insisting she stay for coffee and conversation. They talked about the book, about the character of Jane and her fierce independence, and Rebecca felt Nathan watching her with an intensity that made her acutely aware of every word she spoke. "You remind me of her," Nathan said suddenly. "Jane Eyre. You have that same strength, that same determination to stand on your own feet no matter what." Rebecca felt her cheeks warm. "I am not that strong. I nearly fell apart that day at the auction." "Strength is not about never breaking," Nathan said. "It is about getting back up when you do. You sold your horse to save your mother. That is not weakness, Rebecca. That is love." She returned home that day with a copy of Wuthering Heights and a heart that felt fuller than it had in years. The pattern continued through November and into December. Every 2 weeks, Rebecca would ride to Turner Ranch to return a book and borrow another. Sometimes Nathan would invite her to stay for lunch, and once he rode back with her to deliver firewood he claimed he had extra of, though Rebecca suspected he had cut it specially for them. Margaret watched these developments with knowing eyes. "He is sweet on you," she told Rebecca one evening as they prepared dinner together. Margaret was strong enough now to stand at the counter and help peel vegetables, a task that would have been impossible 2 months ago. "We are just friends, Mama." "Friends do not look at each other the way you two do," Margaret smiled. "And there is nothing wrong with it, darling. He is a good man. Your father would have approved." Rebecca felt tears prick her eyes at the mention of her father. "It is too soon to think about such things. I need to focus on you getting well and on paying Nathan back." "Life does not wait for the perfect moment," Margaret said gently. "Sometimes happiness comes when we least expect it, and we have to be brave enough to reach for it." Winter set in properly in January of 1883. Snow fell across North Texas, unusual and heavy, turning the prairie into a white expanse that was beautiful and treacherous in equal measure. Rebecca worried about making the ride to Turner Ranch in the snow, but she need not have worried. Nathan showed up at their cabin 2 days after the first big snowfall, riding through the drifts with supplies. "I thought you might be running low," he said, unloading flour, sugar, salt, and coffee from his saddlebags. "The roads into town are nearly impassable." "You rode all this way in the snow." Rebecca was touched and alarmed. "Nathan, you could have been hurt." "I know the trail well enough to ride it in the dark," Nathan assured her, and I wanted to make sure you and your mother were all right." Margaret invited Nathan to stay for dinner, and he accepted gratefully. The three of them sat around the small table in the cabin, eating the stew Rebecca had made and talking like old friends. Nathan told stories about memorable cattle drives and narrow escapes from storms. Margaret spoke about Fort Worth in the old days before the war, when it was barely more than a trading post. Rebecca mostly listened, content to watch the two people she cared about most getting along so well. When Nathan finally rose to leave, it was full dark outside. Rebecca walked him out to where his horse was tied, shivering in the cold night air. "Thank you for coming," she said. "And for the supplies. You did not have to do that." "I wanted to," Nathan said. He looked down at her, and in the moonlight reflecting off the snow, his face was all plains and shadows. "Rebecca, I need to tell you something." Her heart began to pound. "What is it?" "These past few months, getting to know you, spending time with you, it has meant more to me than you might realize. I was not lying when I said it gets lonely out at the ranch. But it is more than that. I find myself thinking about you when you are not there, looking forward to your visits. Wishing I had an excuse to see you more often." He took a breath. "I am trying to say that I care for you, more than as a friend." Rebecca felt like the world had tilted on its axis. She had suspected Nathan might have feelings for her, had hoped for it even, but hearing him say it out loud made it real in a way that was both thrilling and terrifying. "I care for you too," she admitted. "I have for a while now. But Nathan, I am still in debt to you. I have only managed to save back $12 toward repaying the $80 you gave me. It does not feel right to start something between us when I still owe you so much." "Then consider the debt forgiven," Nathan said immediately. "No." Rebecca shook her head firmly. "I will not have our relationship built on charity. I need to do this, Nathan. I need to pay you back and know that I can stand on my own 2 feet. Then, if you still want to court me properly, we can talk about it." Nathan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in Rebecca's expression must have told him it would be pointless. "All right," he said finally, "but I am not going to stop coming by to check on you and your mother. That has nothing to do with money and everything to do with being a decent neighbor." Rebecca smiled. "I would not expect anything less." Nathan reached out and took her hand, his gloved fingers warm around hers. "I will wait, Rebecca. However long it takes, I will wait." He rode away into the snow, and Rebecca stood watching until he disappeared into the white landscape. Then she went back inside where her mother was waiting by the fire with a knowing smile. "He is in love with you," Margaret said. "Mama, he did not say that. He did not have to. It is written all over his face every time he looks at you." Margaret coughed lightly, but it was nothing like the terrible racking coughs of earlier in the winter. "The question is, are you in love with him?" Rebecca sat down beside her mother and stared into the fire. "I think I might be." "Is that foolish? I have only known him for a few months." "Your father and I knew we were meant to be together after 3 weeks," Margaret said. "When you know, you know. Time has nothing to do with it." The winter passed slowly. Nathan continued to visit regularly, always bringing supplies or firewood or some other practical excuse for the trip. Rebecca continued to save every penny she could, doing extra mending work, selling eggs from their few chickens, even selling some of her mother's preserves at the general store in town. The debt of $80 felt insurmountable, but she chipped away at it doggedly. By March, when the snow finally melted and the first green shoots began to appear on the prairie, Rebecca had saved $42. It was more than half, but still not enough. She was determined not to start a formal courtship with Nathan until the debt was fully paid. One afternoon in early April, Margaret called Rebecca over to where she sat on the porch, enjoying the spring sunshine. "I want to talk to you about something," Margaret said. Rebecca sat down beside her mother, noticing how much healthier Margaret looked. The medicine and good food and rest had worked wonders. Margaret's cheeks had color again, and she could walk around the cabin and yard without getting winded. "What is it, Mama?" "I have been thinking about Nathan, and about this debt you are so determined to pay off." Margaret took Rebecca's hand. "I know why you feel you need to do it. Your father raised you to be independent and proud, and those are good qualities. But sometimes pride can stand in the way of happiness." "I am not letting pride stand in the way of anything," Rebecca protested. "I just need to know that I can contribute equally to a relationship, that I am not starting off as a burden." "Do you think Nathan sees you as a burden?" "No, and when you are married, will you expect to keep completely separate finances? To pay him back for every meal he provides, every piece of firewood he cuts?" Rebecca was silent. She had not thought of it that way. "Marriage is a partnership, Rebecca. It is about sharing everything, burdens and blessings alike. If you wait until you have paid back every cent, you are wasting precious time that you could be spending building a life together." Margaret squeezed her daughter's hand. "I am not saying you should not repay him if that matters to you, but maybe you could talk to Nathan about it. Find a way to handle it that does not mean putting your life on hold." Rebecca thought about her mother's words for the rest of the day. That evening, she made a decision. She would ride to Turner Ranch the next day and talk to Nathan honestly about everything, about her feelings and her fears, and her stubborn need to pay her own way. The next morning dawned clear and beautiful. Rebecca braided her hair with special care and wore her best dress, the blue one that her mother said brought out her eyes. She saddled Willow and made the familiar ride to Turner Ranch, her heart pounding with nervous anticipation. Nathan was working with a young horse in one of the corrals when she arrived. He looked up in surprise, then immediately left what he was doing and walked over to meet her. "Rebecca, is everything all right?" "Your mother, Mama, is fine," Rebecca assured him quickly. "Better than fine, actually. She is the reason I am here." Nathan helped her dismount and they walked to the porch of the house. They sat on the steps in the sunshine and Rebecca gathered her courage. "I have been thinking about what you said in January," she began. "About caring for me, about wanting to court me." "I meant every word," Nathan said quietly. "I know you did. And I need you to know that I feel the same way. These past months, getting to know you, I have come to realize that you are one of the best men I have ever known. You are kind and generous and smart and funny, and I think about you all the time." Nathan's face lit up with hope. "Then why do you look so serious?" "Because I still owe you $38, and it is going to take me at least 3 more months to save that much, maybe longer. And my mother pointed out that I am being stubborn and prideful by making us both wait." "You are not being stubborn," Nathan said. "I understand why it matters to you. But it should not matter more than being with you," Rebecca said. "So I have a proposal. A real one this time, not just me borrowing books and pretending that is all I want." Nathan moved closer to her on the step, his eyes locked on hers. "I am listening. I will keep saving to pay you back, every penny, but I will not let that stop us from courting properly. And if things between us progress the way I hope they will, we can consider that debt as part of our shared finances when the time comes. Does that seem fair?" Nathan was quiet for a long moment, and Rebecca started to worry that she had said something wrong. Then he reached out and cupped her face in his hand, his thumb brushing gently across her cheek. Rebecca rose. "I have been in love with you since the day I saw you crying at that auction," he said. "Watching you try to be brave while your heart was breaking was the most beautiful thing I had ever seen. I did not give you that money expecting anything in return, but if I am honest, I hoped you might come back into my life somehow. I hoped I might get to know you. And every day since then has been better than the last because you are in it." Rebecca felt tears welling up, but they were happy tears this time. "Are you saying—" "I am saying I love you," Nathan said. "And I do not care about the money. I never did. But if it matters to you, we will do it your way. You can pay me back or not pay me back, or we can argue about it for the next 50 years for all I care, as long as we are together." Rebecca laughed and cried at the same time. "I love you too. I think I have for months, but I was too scared to admit it." Nathan leaned in slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wanted to, but Rebecca did not want to. She closed the distance between them and kissed him, feeling like every piece of her life had finally clicked into place. The kiss was gentle and sweet and full of promise, and when they finally pulled apart, both of them were smiling. "Does this mean I can court you properly now?" Nathan asked. "Yes," Rebecca said. "Yes, it does." The courtship that followed was everything Rebecca could have hoped for and more. Nathan was attentive without being overbearing, romantic without being foolish. He would ride to the cabin several times a week, always bringing small gifts: wildflowers, a book he thought she would enjoy, a length of pretty fabric he had bought in town. They would go on long rides together across the prairie, talking about everything and nothing, planning a future that seemed brighter every day. Margaret adored Nathan and made no secret of the fact that she hoped to see them married soon. "I want grandchildren while I am still young enough to enjoy them," she would say, making both Rebecca and Nathan blush. In June, Nathan asked Rebecca to marry him. They were sitting by the creek near his ranch, watching the water flow past in the golden evening light. He did not have a ring yet, he admitted, but he promised to buy her one as soon as he sold his cattle in the fall. Rebecca did not care about a ring. She said yes immediately, and they sealed the promise with a kiss that left them both breathless and grinning like fools. They decided to wait until autumn to marry, giving Margaret time to regain her full strength, and Nathan time to prepare the ranch house for a wife. Rebecca threw herself into preparations, sewing a wedding dress from the fabric Nathan had given her, planning a small ceremony in Fort Worth with just a few friends and neighbors in attendance. In August, something happened that changed everything. Rebecca was doing laundry behind the cabin when a well-dressed gentleman in a fine carriage pulled up to the house. He introduced himself as Mr. Arthur Pemberton, a lawyer from Dallas. "I am looking for Miss Rebecca Rose," he said. "I am Rebecca Rose," she replied, wiping her wet hands on her apron. Mr. Pemberton looked relieved. "I have been searching for you for several weeks. I represent the estate of your uncle, Jacob Rose." Rebecca frowned. "I do not have an Uncle Jacob. My father was an only child." "Jacob was your father's cousin, actually, but he had no closer relations. He passed away 3 months ago and left his entire estate to your father, Thomas Rose. Since your father is deceased, the inheritance passes to you as his only child." Rebecca felt dizzy. "Inheritance? How much are we talking about?" Mr. Pemberton pulled out a document from his case. "The estate is valued at approximately $5,000, including property in Dallas, stocks, and cash assets." Rebecca had to sit down. $5,000 was more money than she could imagine. It was enough to live on comfortably for years, enough to ensure that her mother would never want for medicine or care, enough to pay Nathan back 10 times over and still have plenty left. "I do not understand," she said. "Why did I not know about this uncle?" "Your father and Jacob had a falling out many years ago, before you were born. Jacob never married and had no children of his own. On his deathbed, he expressed regret for the estrangement and asked that his estate go to Thomas or his heirs." Mr. Pemberton handed her the document. "Everything is in order. I just need your signature to transfer the assets to you." Rebecca signed with a trembling hand. Mr. Pemberton explained that it would take a few weeks to finalize everything, but that she could expect to receive the funds by the end of September. He tipped his hat and drove away, leaving Rebecca standing in the yard with her life utterly transformed. When Nathan came by that evening, Rebecca told him everything. He was thrilled for her, sweeping her up in his arms and spinning her around in celebration. "You know what this means," he said. "You will never have to worry about money again. Your mother will have the best care available. You can have anything you want." "I already have everything I want," Rebecca said. "I have Mama healthy and happy, I have Willow, and I have you." "You certainly have me," Nathan agreed, kissing her soundly. But later, as Rebecca lay in bed that night, she thought about the money and what it represented. Security, certainly. Freedom from the constant worry about survival. But also something else. The ability to truly enter her marriage as Nathan's equal, with resources of her own to contribute to their life together. When the money finally came through in late September, Rebecca's first action was to go to Nathan's ranch with a leather pouch containing $80. "I am paying you back," she said firmly when Nathan tried to protest. "Every penny you gave me that day, plus a little extra for interest." Nathan looked at the money, then at Rebecca. "You do not have to do this." "I know I do not have to, I want to. Please, Nathan, let me do this." He took the money and set it on the table, then he took Rebecca's hands in his. "All right, consider the debt paid in full. Now, can we please stop arguing about money and focus on getting married?" They were married on the first Saturday in October at a small church in Fort Worth. Rebecca wore her handmade dress and carried a bouquet of autumn wildflowers. Margaret cried through the entire ceremony, but they were tears of joy. Nathan could not take his eyes off his bride, and when the preacher pronounced them husband and wife, he kissed her so thoroughly that the small crowd of witnesses burst into applause. The reception was held at Turner Ranch, which Rebecca could now officially call home. Friends and neighbors brought food and gifts, and there was dancing and laughter that lasted long into the evening. When everyone finally left, Nathan carried Rebecca over the threshold of the house that was now hers as much as his. Their wedding night was tender and passionate, a culmination of months of longing and love. Nathan was gentle with Rebecca, making sure she felt cherished and safe. They talked and laughed and made love and fell asleep in each other's arms as the moon rose over the Texas prairie. The first months of marriage were an adjustment, but a happy one. Rebecca moved her mother into one of the spare rooms at the ranch, wanting Margaret close by. The older woman's health continued to improve in the comfortable home with plenty of good food and warmth. Margaret helped with cooking and household tasks, giving Rebecca more time to help Nathan with the ranch work. Rebecca discovered she had a talent for managing the business side of the ranch. She kept meticulous records of expenses and income, negotiated better prices with buyers, and even suggested diversifying their stock to include sheep as well as cattle. Nathan was impressed and grateful, happy to share the burden of running the ranch with a true partner. In January of 1884, Rebecca discovered she was pregnant. Nathan was overjoyed, immediately becoming even more protective and attentive than he had been before. He insisted Rebecca rest more, take things easy, let him handle the heavy work. "I am pregnant, not fragile," Rebecca protested, but she was secretly touched by his concern. Margaret was thrilled at the prospect of becoming a grandmother. She immediately began knitting tiny clothes and planning for the arrival of her grandchild. The pregnancy progressed smoothly. Rebecca felt healthy and strong, enjoying the changes in her body even as they made certain tasks more difficult. Nathan was endlessly fascinated by the growing swell of her belly, spending long evenings with his hand on her stomach, feeling the baby kick and move. On a warm September evening, almost exactly 2 years after Rebecca had stood in that auction yard selling Willow, she gave birth to a healthy baby boy. The labor was long and difficult, but Margaret and the midwife from town saw her through it. When Nathan was finally allowed in to meet his son, he had tears streaming down his face. "He is perfect," Nathan whispered, cradling the tiny bundle carefully. "Absolutely perfect." They named him Thomas after Rebecca's father. Little Thomas had his father's dark hair and his mother's determined spirit, making his presence known with lusty cries whenever he was hungry or displeased. Life at Turner Ranch fell into a comfortable rhythm. Rebecca balanced motherhood with helping manage the ranch. Margaret doted on her grandson, and Nathan proved to be a devoted and hands-on father. He would take breaks from ranch work to come inside and hold Thomas, talking to the baby about horses and cattle and the wide Texas sky. In the spring of 1885, Margaret's health took a sudden turn for the worse. The consumption that everyone had thought was beaten came back with a vengeance, and this time the medicine could not hold it at bay. She died peacefully in her sleep one night in May, with Rebecca holding her hand. Rebecca grieved deeply for her mother, but she found comfort in knowing that Margaret's last years had been happy ones. She had seen her daughter married to a good man, had lived to meet her grandson, and had died in a warm, comfortable home surrounded by love. Nathan supported Rebecca through her grief, holding her when she cried, taking care of Thomas when she needed time alone, being the steady presence she needed to get through the loss. "She told me once that she was grateful I bought Willow that day," Nathan said one evening as they sat together on the porch, watching the sunset. "She said you would never have been stubborn enough to come out to the ranch if you had not needed to return that first book. She said I gave her more than just money for medicine. I gave her daughter a future." Rebecca leaned against her husband's shoulder. "She was right. You gave me everything." Life continued at the ranch. Thomas grew into a lively toddler, running through the house and the yard with boundless energy. Willow, now an older mare, was gentle with the child, letting him pet her and feed her treats under Rebecca's watchful eye. In 1886, Rebecca gave birth to a daughter they named Margaret, after Rebecca's mother. Little Maggie was the opposite of her boisterous brother, calm and quiet, with serious blue-gray eyes that reminded everyone of Nathan. Nathan expanded the ranch operations, buying more land and increasing both the cattle and sheep herds. The diversification that Rebecca had suggested proved profitable, and Turner Ranch became one of the most successful operations in the area. But success did not change Nathan. He remained the same kind, humble man Rebecca had fallen in love with, devoted to his family and his land. In the summer of 1887, Rebecca was hanging laundry while Thomas played in the yard and baby Maggie napped in her cradle on the porch. Nathan rode up with something in his arms, wrapped in a blanket. "What do you have there?" Rebecca asked. Nathan dismounted and carefully pulled back the blanket to reveal a tiny foal, barely able to stand on its wobbly legs. "Found her out in the north pasture. Her mother died during birth. I am afraid she will not make it without help." Rebecca looked at the foal and felt her heart clench. The tiny creature was gray, just like Willow had been. "Bring her to the barn," she said immediately. They set up the foal in a stall, and Rebecca spent the next 3 days nursing her much as she had nursed Willow 9 years ago. It was harder this time with 2 young children to care for, but Rebecca managed with Nathan's help. The foal was a fighter, clinging to life with determination. Thomas was fascinated by the baby horse. He would sit in the stall for hours, watching his mother feed the foal with a bottle, talking to her in his high, childish voice. "What will we call her, Mama?" Thomas asked. Rebecca thought about it. "Promise," she said. "We will call her Promise." The foal survived and thrived under Rebecca's care. As she grew, it became clear that Promise had inherited Willow's gentle temperament and intelligence. Thomas was convinced that Promise was his horse, the way Willow had been Rebecca's, and Nathan agreed that when the boy was old enough, he could train her himself. Years passed in a blur of happiness and hard work. The ranch continued to prosper. Thomas grew into a responsible young man who loved the ranch life as much as his father did. Maggie proved to have her mother's head for business, helping with the accounts from a young age. In 1889, Rebecca gave birth to twins, 2 boys they named Jacob and James. The house was full of noise and laughter and chaos, and Rebecca would not have had it any other way. One evening in the fall of 1891, nearly 10 years after that fateful day at the auction, Rebecca and Nathan sat together on the porch after the children were finally asleep. Willow, now an elderly mare, grazed peacefully in the paddock. Promise stood beside her, the younger horse keeping the older one company in her twilight years. "Do you ever think about that day?" Nathan asked, his arm around Rebecca's shoulders. "The day you sold Willow?" "Sometimes," Rebecca said. "It was the worst day of my life, right up until the moment you gave her back. I knew the second I saw you crying that I was going to give her back," Nathan admitted. "I just had not worked out how to do it without offending you. You looked so fierce and proud, even through the tears." "I was not feeling fierce. I was falling apart." "You were brave," Nathan corrected. "There is a difference." Rebecca turned to look at her husband. Time had added a few lines to his face and some silver to his dark hair, but he was still the handsomest man she knew. "Do you know what I think about sometimes? I think about what my life would have been like if you had not done what you did, if you had just kept Willow and ridden away." "You would have survived," Nathan said confidently. "You are a survivor, Rebecca. You would have found another way, maybe. But I would not have found you. I would not have any of this." She gestured at the house, the ranch, the life they had built together. "Everything good in my life came from that one moment of kindness." "Everything good in my life came from it too," Nathan said. He pulled her closer and kissed the top of her head. "I love you, Rebecca Turner. I have loved you from the very beginning. I love you too." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars come out over the prairie. Inside the house, their children slept safely. In the paddock, 2 horses grazed in the moonlight, one old and one young, bound together by companionship and history. Rebecca thought about all the twists and turns that had brought her to this moment. Her father's death, her mother's illness, the desperate winter that had forced her to sell Willow. Every hardship, every struggle had led her to Nathan, had given her this beautiful life. The next morning, Rebecca woke to find Thomas already up and out at the barn, working with Promise. At 9 years old, he was already an accomplished horseman, and the bond between boy and horse was as strong as the one Rebecca had shared with Willow. Maggie helped Rebecca make breakfast, while the twins played on the floor with wooden toys Nathan had carved. It was a normal morning, full of the everyday chaos of a busy household, and Rebecca treasured it. Nathan came in from the morning chores and swept Maggie up in his arms, making her giggle. He kissed Rebecca good morning, then sat down at the table with Jacob in his lap. "I was thinking," Nathan said as they ate breakfast together, "we should have a party, celebrate 10 years since we met." "It has been 10 years and a month," Rebecca pointed out. "Then we will call it a harvest celebration. Invite all the neighbors, have dancing and food. What do you say?" Rebecca smiled. "I say yes. The children would love it." They spent the next week preparing for the party. Rebecca and Maggie baked pies and cakes. Nathan and Thomas cleaned out the barn for dancing. Invitations went out to friends and neighbors from miles around. The day of the party was perfect, clear and cool with brilliant autumn sunshine. People began arriving in the early afternoon, bringing food and musical instruments. Soon the yard was full of people talking and laughing, children running and playing, music filling the air. Rebecca moved through the crowd, greeting friends, accepting compliments on her children, feeling utterly content. She caught sight of Nathan across the yard, deep in conversation with some of the other ranchers, and felt a surge of love so strong it almost took her breath away. As if sensing her gaze, Nathan looked up and smiled. He excused himself from the conversation and made his way over to her. "Dance with me," he asked, offering his hand. Rebecca took it gladly, and they moved to where several couples were already dancing in the barn. Nathan pulled her close and they swayed to the music, lost in their own world despite the crowd around them. "Happy?" Nathan asked softly. "Happier than I ever thought possible," Rebecca answered honestly. When the party finally wound down and the last guests departed, the family worked together to clean up. Even the twins helped in their small way, carrying cups and plates to the kitchen. When everything was finally done, Nathan and Rebecca tucked the exhausted children into bed and retired to their own room. "That was a good day," Nathan said, pulling Rebecca into his arms. "It was a perfect day," Rebecca agreed. She thought about the girl she had been 10 years ago, desperate and afraid, selling the horse she loved to survive. That girl could never have imagined the life Rebecca had now, could never have dreamed that such happiness was possible. In the years that followed, life at Turner Ranch continued to flourish. Thomas took on more responsibility with the ranch work, showing the same dedication and skill his father possessed. Maggie's sharp business mind helped the ranch navigate the economic ups and downs of the 1890s. The twins grew into strapping young men who could work as hard as anyone twice their age. In 1895, Rebecca and Nathan celebrated their 10th wedding anniversary with a quiet dinner, just the two of them while the children stayed with neighbors. They talked about the past decade, marveling at how fast it had gone, how much their children had grown. "I want more," Nathan said suddenly. Rebecca looked at him in surprise. "More children, Nathan? I am 35 years old. I think 5 is quite enough." "Not more children," Nathan laughed. "Though I would not object if it happened. I mean more years. More time with you. I want to grow old together, watch our grandchildren grow up, celebrate our 50th anniversary." "I want that too," Rebecca said softly. "I want a lifetime with you, several lifetimes if we can manage it." Willow died peacefully in her sleep in the summer of 1896 at the age of 19. Rebecca wept as she had not wept since her mother's death, mourning the mare that had been such an important part of her life. They buried Willow on a hill overlooking the ranch, and Thomas carved a beautiful wooden marker for the grave. "She was a good horse," Nathan said, holding Rebecca as she cried. "She brought us together. We owe her everything." Thomas, now 13, stood beside his parents with his own tears streaming down his face. "Promise we'll miss her," he said quietly. And Promise did seem to grieve, standing by the fence and calling out occasionally as if looking for her old companion. But gradually, the younger Mare adjusted, and life went on as it always does. The turn of the century brought changes to Texas and to the ranch. Barbed wire was reshaping the open range, railroads were expanding, and the wild frontier was slowly being tamed. But Turner Ranch adapted and thrived, always staying ahead of the changes. Thomas married in 1901, bringing a sweet-natured girl named Sarah to the ranch. She and Rebecca got along wonderfully, and Rebecca was delighted to pass on the running of the household to capable younger hands. It freed Rebecca to focus on the aspects of ranch management she most enjoyed, working side by side with Nathan as they always had. Maggie, surprising everyone, decided she wanted to go to college to study business. It was unusual for a woman, but Nathan and Rebecca supported her dream. They sent her to a women's college in the East, and she excelled, graduating at the top of her class before returning to Texas to help run the ranch with a level of expertise that impressed everyone. The twins took different paths. Jacob stayed on the ranch, loving the work and the land as much as his father did. James went off to seek his fortune in the oil fields that were beginning to boom in Texas, though he came home regularly to visit. In 1903, Thomas and Sarah presented Nathan and Rebecca with their first grandchild, a baby girl they named Willow Rebecca. Rebecca held her tiny namesake and felt the circle of life complete itself. From the foal she had raised so many years ago, to the horse that had brought her Nathan, to this new life carrying on the legacy. Nathan, now in his 40s with more silver than dark in his hair, was absolutely smitten with his granddaughter. He carved her toys and sang her songs and declared that she was the most beautiful baby ever born. "You said that about all our children," Rebecca teased him. "And I was right every time," Nathan replied without shame. More grandchildren followed over the years. The ranch house that had once seemed so large now felt full and alive with multiple generations under one roof. Rebecca, her hair now completely silver, presided over the growing family with grace and love, making sure everyone felt welcome and cherished. On their 25th wedding anniversary in 1908, Nathan surprised Rebecca with a gift. He led her out to the barn where a beautiful young mare stood, gray like Willow and promise before her. "She is the great-granddaughter of Willow," Nathan explained. "I have been tracking Willow's bloodline for years, making sure the line continued. I thought you might like to train one more." Rebecca was overwhelmed. At 48, she had not thought about training another horse, but looking at the young mare, she felt the old excitement stir. "What should we name her?" "I thought maybe Hope," Nathan said. "We have had Willow and Promise. Hope seems like the right next step." Rebecca trained Hope over the next year and found that she still had the touch. The mare was intelligent and willing, with the same gentle temperament that had characterized her ancestors. Working with Hope made Rebecca feel young again, connected to the girl she had been when she first raised Willow. The years continued to pass, marked by celebrations and sorrows, births and deaths, the endless cycle of life on the ranch. Nathan and Rebecca grew old together, their love deepening with each passing year. They had seen Texas transform from wild frontier to something more settled and civilized. They had built a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. In 1915, on a warm summer evening, Nathan and Rebecca sat together on the porch as they had done countless times over the past 33 years. They were in their mid-50s now, still active and healthy but beginning to feel the weight of years. "You remember what you said that day at the auction?" Nathan asked. "When I tried to give you the money," Rebecca thought back. "I said a lot of things. I was rather emotional. You said you could not take my money, that I did not even know you." Nathan reached over and took her hand. "But I did know you even then. I knew everything important about you in that moment. I knew you had a good heart and fierce love and unshakable integrity. Everything else I have learned over the years has just confirmed what I knew from the start." Rebecca squeezed his hand, feeling tears prick her eyes. "You gave me everything, Nathan. My horse, my home, my family, my life. All because you saw me crying and decided to help." "You gave me just as much," Nathan insisted. "You gave me purpose and partnership and a love I never thought I would find. You gave me children and grandchildren and a reason to build something lasting." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun set over the prairie they both loved. Inside the house, they could hear the sounds of their family, Thomas and Sarah with their 3 children, Maggie home for a visit, Jacob and his new wife preparing dinner. "We did well," Rebecca said softly. "Did we not?" "We did more than well," Nathan replied. "We built something beautiful." The last years of their lives were peaceful ones. Nathan and Rebecca stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch, letting Thomas and Jacob take over while they enjoyed their grandchildren and great-grandchildren. They traveled a little, visiting James in the oil fields, going to see Maggie in Houston where she had started a successful business consulting firm. But they always came back to Turner Ranch, to the land they had built their life on, to the home that held so many memories. Nathan died first in 1924, peacefully in his sleep at the age of 67. Rebecca was devastated by the loss, but she took comfort in knowing they had been blessed with 42 years together, longer than many couples got. She lived for another 5 years, spending her time with her children and grandchildren, teaching the youngest ones about the ranch and its history. She told them the story of Willow and the day at the auction, about the cowboy who had returned her beloved horse and won her heart. Rebecca Turner died in 1929 at the age of 69, surrounded by her family. She was buried next to Nathan on the hill where Willow's grave was, overlooking the ranch they had built together. The legacy they left behind was not just in the successful ranch or the large family, but in the values they had lived by: kindness, integrity, love, and the courage to help others even when there was no obvious benefit to yourself. Thomas, now the patriarch of the Turner family, gathered his children and grandchildren after Rebecca's funeral. He stood on the porch of the ranch house and looked out at the land his parents had nurtured for over 40 years. "Your grandmother used to say that everything good in her life came from one moment of kindness," Thomas told the assembled family. "She never forgot that, and she spent the rest of her life passing that kindness on to others. That is the real legacy she and our father left us. Not this ranch, not the money, but the example of how to live with an open heart and generous spirit." The family murmured agreement, and as the sun set over Turner Ranch, they all felt the presence of Nathan and Rebecca, looking down on the empire of love and family they had created from a single act of compassion on a dusty street in Fort Worth so many years ago. The ranch continued to thrive, passed down through generations, each one adding their own chapter to the story while never forgetting the foundation that Nathan and Rebecca had built. Willow's bloodline continued through Hope and her descendants, gray mares that seemed to carry the spirit of that first special horse. And sometimes, on quiet evenings when the wind blew just right across the prairie, people swore they could see 2 figures sitting on the porch of the ranch house, holding hands and watching the sunset together, forever bound by a love that had conquered poverty, pride, and time itself. Their story became a legend in Fort Worth and the surrounding area, told and retold as an example of how kindness can change lives, how love can grow from the smallest seeds, how 2 people from different circumstances can come together to build something that lasts long after they are gone. The girl who sold her horse to save her mother, and the cowboy who saw her tears and gave back more than he took, lived on in memory and in the family they created, a testament to the transformative power of compassion and love.